Welcome to Stuff You Missed in History Class, a production of iHeartRadio.
Happy Friday. I'm Tracy V. Wilson.
And I'm Holly Fry.
We talked about Charlotte Cooper Sterry this week.
So much tennis.
Tennis championship. Tennis champion. I said that one time while recording, too, and had to do it over when I called her a championship instead of a champion. And a weird coincidence of timing, this episode is not coming out immediately adjacent to Wimbledon, but I did research and write it as Wimbledon was happening, which was not planned at all. And we just had like a weird logistical situation where the actual episode is coming out at a to-be-determined date in the future. So you all will be in the listening audience learning about it. I don't know, probably shortly after we have learned what date the episode will wind up coming out. It's a little mystery at the moment. I did go down a big rabbit hole about the descriptions of her as deaf because so many articles about her that I read were all similarly brief. They all had the same detail of the age being 26 and the description being deaf, but like no clear indication of where that information had come from. And the fact that it was like the same year in all of them, I was like, this has to have come from somewhere. And we've definitely had situations on the show where there was some particular detail that wound up in an article somewhere, and then that wound up in all of the other articles. And so I went down this rabbit hole trying to find it out. Trying to get more detail. Even the couple of sources that described it as being the result of an infection, I don't actually know if that was actual information from somewhere or if it was an assumption on the part of the writer.
Right.
Because there are various infections that can cause hearing loss. And again, I think today, a lot of people, especially outside the deaf community, when they hear or read the word deaf, think of like a total or near total absence of hearing.
Right.
That's not necessarily the case with everybody, but I think a lot of people expect the word deaf to mean like a near total absence of hearing, while hard of hearing might mean a different degree of hearing loss. At the time she was living, though, there was kind of more of a spectrum in common use.
Right.
And I just really don't know what specifically that meant for her. And, you know, her nephew in a book about Wimbledon even was a little, I don't want to say evasive because that has a connotation of trying to hide something. But like even what he said was not particularly exact because he was like, well, I think I'm right in saying that she couldn't hear the ball.
Right. Which sounds like it probably wasn't something they discussed in the family much either.
Right. Yeah. So I have a lot of curiosity about that. Just because, you know, it's important to talk about people in history and, you know, their actual lived experiences. And I just don't have a lot of information about it. Weird thing I stumbled across in some of the research in the part about the history of tennis when we were talking about court tennis and lawn tennis.
Real tennis.
Yeah, real tennis. That sort of has a, you know, an implication that lawn tennis is the fake tennis. And I feel like some of the people writing about it today, it almost felt like that was their opinion on it. Because I would read some depictions that were like, court tennis is much faster paced than lawn tennis and much more physicality required on the part of players. It just came off as sounding really snobby to me almost. Of being like, court tennis is clearly the superior sport to lawn tennis and the tone of it. Not everything sounded that way, but there were a few things where I was like, this sport sort of strikes me as being a little exclusionary.
Right. But I think that's a common behavior, right? Like, I don't love it, but there are always people who, like, whatever they're into, they need to prove that it's the most best one.
Sure.
Like, you know, I have run into, I love rabbits. I think they're rad pets, but I remember meeting somebody at a party who was like really into their rabbits to the point that you couldn't say, I have a cat, without them running over and injecting into the conversation to tell you why you should have a rabbit and it's a way better animal. And it's like, they're both cool. Do you love your rabbit? Cool. I also love my cats, or whatever anybody has.
Right.
And I don't know why there is that tendency for some people to want their thing to be the most one. I'm sure I have done it at some point in time as well when I was younger, I hope. But I think that's probably what feeds those kinds of narratives, where people really want to assert that if you're not doing this, you're not doing the best one.
Right. Yeah.
Just do what you like. It's fine.
Yeah, that seems great. I also would love to know more about Charlotte Cooper Sterry's like personal life beyond tennis, because vast majority of what we talked about today was about tennis. And she did have a life beyond tennis.
She had kids.
Yeah. And, it's clear that the whole family was really involved in athletics in general and tennis specifically. But it's not the only thing in her life. It does seem like she was really well-liked and well-respected, and people thought she was a great player, and also like a great sport, like a kind and respectful person to be sharing the court with. But that really know nothing beyond that. Like,
right. The one clue that we have is her basically saying, like, you know how to train year round. It's fine. Like, you could do other stuff. Enjoy your winter, whatever you want to do, which I do love.
Yeah. Just hang out. You can play other stuff if you want, but you don't have to.
If ever there were a great example of work-life balance, right? Just the casual, like, no, I don't.
Just take the winter off. It's fine.
I'm good. Sometimes I play a little something to keep my eye moving, but that's fine.
I like how she seemed almost embarrassed to mention ping pong as an option.
Ping pong's great.
Of things to play. I've never been particularly good at things that required that style of like hand-eye coordination.
I never played tennis because I associated it with people that would not like me growing up.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like, that was clearly not a herd that was really into my particular flavor of weird. And like, that's cool. You have that. I'm going to go do other stuff. Not that I was ever like, I wish I could have played tennis. It just never shook out that way.
Right. It does seem like her family was pretty comfortable. It's the impression I got anyway. She also, though, as far as I know, only ever had 2 rackets. There was the good racket for playing in good weather, and there was the not as good racket to play when it rained.
I love that.
She wouldn't mess up her good racket. I love that too.
I love that. As a maximalist that buys 27 of everything, I can't imagine it, but I love it.
Yeah. I also love the pictures of her and what she played tennis in. Because it really was skirts all the way down, almost to the ground. And, like full long sleeves. There's a picture of her in particular. She's got a necktie on.
Love.
I love it. I love all of it. Random side note from this episode is that there is one mention of Martina Navratilova. Do you remember a special that was on Comedy Central in like the 90s called Out There? I think it was called Out There. I think there were Out There and Out There Too. And it was like a comedy special, like specifically of gay and lesbian performers. And there was a singer named Frank who sang a song about Martina Navratilova.
No. Somehow I missed this one.
I missed all of this. So, so it was a song about Martina Navratilova, including spelling out Martina Navratilova letter by letter. I don't know. It's anytime I think of Martina Navratilova, I get that song in my head.
See, I think of her now on Bravo.
Oh, yeah?
Because her wife is a Real Housewife.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah. And I am an aficionado of trashy television, which I put all Bravo shows under. I am not calling anyone on them trash. I'm just saying that is not highbrow entertainment. And that's how, although I don't watch that one regularly. That one is Miami, and I don't keep up with it.
Right.
Yeah.
This is not a thing that is in my sphere of knowledge in any way.
It is in mine because that is where I really started doing. You are actually indirectly the cause of why I got into Bravo.
Really?
Here's why.
Okay.
Because when I first started working at How Stuff Works, and you were the site director and I was the tech editor.
Right.
And I would just find my brain broken by the end of the day, because often there would be like an article about a technology that I didn't know jack about.
Mm-hmm.
And I would have to learn enough about it to be able to edit the article and fact check it.
Mm-hmm.
And so by the end of the day, there was one day in particular where my husband was like, "You are watching a lot of trashy reality TV lately."
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, "Babe, I had to learn how telemetry works today. And right now I would just like to watch very privileged, pretty people yell at each other over petty problems, because that's about what my brain can fathom." And he was like, "Okay." And ever since then, he's been like, "I get it completely." Like at the end of a day, he's like, "Do you need to watch some garbage?" And I'll be like, "Yeah, kind of."
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I know who's on every Bravo show.
Yep, I know. I'm like, do we even have Bravo at my house? I don't actually know.
Which has come in handy. I don't remember why. There was another time where, we used to peek behind the curtain. The way How Stuff Works used to work was that, like, you would, as an editor, as a copy editor, get the stuff, assign it to writers.
Uh-huh.
It would come back. You would copy edit it. You would also hand it to another editor for an eyeball pass.
Right.
And then that would make sure a lot of eyes were on it and you would catch things. And one of our other editors, I don't remember why, another housewife had come up on an article that was not specifically about them, but I was like, "That's not how you spell her name." And it was like, she just happened to have an odd spelling of a common name.
Right.
And the other editor was like, "I never in a million years would have caught that." And I'm like,
Yeah.
"Because you're not watching garbage."
Yeah. Anyway. I love that little backstory. I have the song about Martina Navratilova. I don't remember. I think that's the thing I remember most from those two comedy specials. Although I bet if some clip from it showed up in front of my face, I would be like, "Oh, I watched that like 25 times."
Now I feel like I gotta find that song.
I think it's called Martina.
Well, I mean, I know Frank. I don't know why I wouldn't know that.
Well,
I'm gonna seek it out, though.
Everybody can go Google it. Yeah. So anyway, tennis, sport I know so little about that I could not bring myself to summarize explanations of how to score it.
Yeah, it's always been a little bit of an inscrutable scoring system to me. Like, I understand it. I've seen how it scores, but I'm still like, but why?
Yeah.
And there's no pourquoi for me. I'll never know.
Yep.
We talked about the sad story of Richard Dad this week.
Yeah.
I don't want the sadness of his story to discourage anyone from going looking for his art. It's quite beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the interesting things about his art is that it's kind of like what I said at the top of the show. I was just fascinated by a painting and was like, I want to know about the person that made this painting, not knowing it was going to lead me down a path of sad and scary things.
Right.
And that is kind of the case of all of his artwork. If you look at it, no part of you probably would get to the point of, I bet someone who was in an institution or dealing with mental illness made this art.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it is very pretty, doesn't cover any of the sort of demonic issues he talked about in his therapies and his confessions.
Mm-hmm.
It's just sort of fascinating that it was almost like a completely separate part of his brain doing that as what was dealing with his other issues. In the way that I will always look for a thing to tickle myself with, even in very dark and sad things. I find myself wondering about Dad's understanding of and grasp of Egyptian religion. Here's why. I mean, we know at this period in time, right? A lot of English and US based people were traveling the world and coming away with some very incorrect understandings of other cultures.
Questionable interpretations.
Yeah, 100%. But the thing that kind of gave me a little just personal chuckle was that he had said his father was the sun at one point. S-U-N, son.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, but if his father is Osiris, that's not the right Egyptian god to be the sun.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just like, I wonder if anybody was like, do you mean Ra? But that's just me being silly. Because I just am. And I'm, as I said, it's like the antidote of how because, Osiris is about fertility and agriculture and the afterlife. Mm-hmm. So the afterlife and the demon stuff makes a little sense. But as we mentioned at the end of the episode, there were like interlocking religious ideologies here, none of which were really like true to their origin state.
Yeah.
If you followed any of those religions, you'd be like, that's not quite right.
Right.
So it may have just been his brain trying to piece together anything he remembered to make some sort of cohesive picture for himself. But that gave me a little bit of a chuckle in the darkness.
Yeah.
We did not talk about Charles Dickens during this. So we mentioned that Dickens was a friend of one of his fellows in the clique.
Right.
And Dickens, apparently, I did not follow this thread because I did not have rabbit hole time. One thing write-up that I read mentioned that Dickens had, when this whole thing went down, kind of done a Stand By Me with some of his friends and been like, you want to see the place where Dad killed his dad? And like took them to the park. But I don't know if that's true or not. But I kind of want to look it up now. We do know that he visited Bethlehem when Dad would have been there, but it doesn't appear that it was like to see him or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting. So I have this whole like, how much did Dickens know and was he a horrible ghoul about it?
Yeah. Do we really know how the rest of his family coped with this?
It's almost like you've read my notes and would like to make a segue for me. Yes and no. So one of the things that comes up in a lot of accounts of his life, but which I didn't find a lot of additional info on other than the mention, and the numbers change, is that several of his siblings also had some sort of mental break at some point.
Mm.
And so that's one of the things that comes up in a lot of kind of analyses that modern doctors try to do on Dad. Is like, is this a genetic thing that was going on with their family? Was there a predisposition?
Did they all have the same heavy metal poisoning?
Right. And I didn't find anything that was like conclusive. Additionally, some things will say like 2 of his siblings, some things will say 3 of his siblings, some will say all of his brothers, but not his sisters. Some will say all of his siblings had some sort of issue in this area. We're also talking about a time when, even though we know that people were pointing out like there is something going mentally wrong with Richard,
mm-hmm.
there was probably also a lot of brushing under the rug of people's issues,
mm-hmm.
especially in a family that maybe is trying to figure out how to cope with all of this and maybe doesn't want to talk about any of it anymore.
Right.
Keeping in mind that it is also a family that is grieving from a horrific incident.
Sure, yeah.
So I don't know a lot about it. And it does seem, I mean, in a way it's very respectful, but it leaves us with a lot of question marks. Right. The press did seem to leave his family alone.
Oh, that's okay.
So I didn't find any commentary in any of the articles I looked through where they were like, we asked his brother Samuel, who was the person that was called when all of this started happening, one of his older brothers, to like manage things and help and step into the role of head of the family at that point. But there were never any quotes from anyone in the family.
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting. So we don't know.
Yeah.
And it breaks my heart. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad that his art gets recognized, at least to some degree. I know you cannot really divorce it when you're doing an exhibition of it from the circumstance of its creation.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like it would be cool and impossible, and in its own way not really responsible, to just have an exhibition of his artwork and not talk about any of his stuff, just to see how people perceive it and interact with it. Because once you look at a piece of artwork and someone says, this person went mad and killed his father, and then he painted all this, you're going to be like looking for clues.
Right.
There's a patina of like presumption that hits all of it at that point.
Yeah.
That you kind of, I'm not faulting anybody for thinking that way either. It's natural to do. But I would be curious. I have only my one experience of that's a cool painting,
Right.
but I don't know what anyone else would do.
There's also people have incredibly strong opinions when someone kills someone else and is later found to have done that because of a mental illness, or
Right.
the mental illness was a contributing factor.
Right.
Like when I was a kid, I don't want to go into too much detail, but there was a mass shooting near where I lived by someone who was then found not guilty of having committed that crime because of a mental illness.
Right.
Which, as I understand it, then led to the state of North Carolina like redoing the legal code to not allow that anymore. But that has been decades and decades ago. And people still have enormously strong opinions about how all of that happened, and feeling like justice was not served.
Right.
Because he was institutionalized rather than being imprisoned or executed.
Right. I think that is sadly pretty common.
Yeah.
I mean, it also, right, it's tricky because you don't want to play into the idea that people dealing with mental illness are inherently dangerous, because there are people all over the world all the time dealing with all different levels of their own mental health evaluations and diagnoses that are in no way
right,
even like within 1,000 miles of being dangerous.
Right.
This one, there are some writings that I found, the way they're older writings, but the way they are penned in talking about his father are almost a little victim blamey. Because it's like everyone told him his son was popping off and he was dangerous and he had delusions that were violent in nature, and he was like, let's go to the country. And I'm like, nobody deserves to be brutally murdered. That's just
right,
full stop.
Right.
But two, like contextually, again, this is not a time when we as a whole, as humanity, had a lot of good tools to deal with someone going through something like that. And, you also have to consider that for a parent who clearly loved his child, to see them going through something painful and not themselves, that's going to impact your decision making at times. And maybe you won't make the right decision because you can't know what the right decision is. You have to make a best guess. I mean, that's life, right? This is Milan Kundera's Unbearable Lightness of Being, is that you can only make the one choice, and then you create this outline of what you think life is. But yeah, I found that troubling, that there is a little bit occasionally of like, if Robert Dodd had done the right thing, it's like, you don't know that would have been the right thing.
Right.
You're not a prognosticator that can determine what the other path would have looked like. It's tricky. There are only a couple of biographies of Dad, and they're hard to get and they're expensive. I went ahead and purchased one because I just really wanted it. But I wish there was more readily available comprehensive stuff, because most articles that you find will either talk about like his trip and his mental break, or his murder, or his institutionalization, and not the whole picture. So you end up having to kind of piece the puzzle together. I got more in many cases from like looking at old newspaper accounts, because they would be like, here are his parents, here's where he was born, here's where, and I'm like, oh yes, at last. So yeah, it's interesting. Sorry to be Debbie Downer this week. Deborah Down. But hopefully the gecko email softened the blow. I don't know. Listen, we're going to get into Halloween soon. I make no promises. This could get very dark this year. I don't know. I don't know. I'm fine, but that's clearly where my brain is going at the moment. Hopefully that did not ruin your mental state in any way or make you feel sad. Hopefully just thoughtful and pensive. If you have time off this weekend, I hope that you spend it doing whatever brings you the most joy possible. We need more of that in the world. If you don't have time off, please seek out joy if you can. I hope everyone is kind to one another and makes it easy for other people to find joy. And we will be right back here tomorrow with a classic episode. And then on Monday, we will have a brand new one for you.
Stuff You Missed in History Class is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.